What's up, guys? It's your boy, the artist Somewhat. Welcome back to another episode of Technique Tuesday, where I give you a closer look at my creation process and break down some technique that I've been using on one of my projects recently. This week, we're going to jump gears from last week and switch from photo, video, and graphic design to music production. This is a technique I use to separate out the different instruments so they don't interfere with each other in the same bandwidths. If you don't really know what that means, basically imagine you had three friends and two of them had a really similar voice in terms of like how high or low their voice was. If they were talking at the same time, it would be kind of more difficult to distinguish their voices from each other. You could still hear the words, but they would kind of run together. The same thing happens when you use instruments in a similar frequency range. So I'm going to show you guys a trick in FL Studio to help kind of separate those bandwidths out and really make each of your instruments shine through. Now, I normally use this on my bass and my 808s because they usually have a really wide frequency band, and compressing that down into a narrow range can really help it shine through. But I do use it on melodies sometimes, and every now and then I'll use it on vocals if it just interferes with some of the other tracks. Now, a lot of you may be familiar by doing this with compression and frequency passes, which does work, but it takes so long, and you gotta sit there adjusting every single knob to figure out where the band pass should stop and where the high pass should start and stuff like that. So I'm gonna show you guys a much faster, much simpler way to achieve the same end. So let's go ahead and get started. Now you may notice my buttons look a little bit different from yours because I'm using a super outdated version of FruityLoops. I'm actually on FL11. And the reason that I'm on FL11 is because I'm poor and someone gave this to me, so you might have to play around a little bit to find the buttons if you don't know FruityLoops that well. But if you already know FruityLoops, both of the plugins that I'll be using today should come stock on every copy of FruityLoops. You don't have to buy any more VSTs or anything. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play the song for you just raw so you can hear what it sounds like. And I want you to be paying attention to the bass, the 808. So that's one run through of the 808. And you can hear it pretty well, and it sounds nice and thick, but it doesn't sound very crispy. And I like the muddy sound of kind of like inner city, just like grimy trap shit, but that doesn't mean that I want it to be interfering with all my other sounds. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my mixer, make sure I have my bass selected, and then I'm going to add Maximus. After that, I'm going to add parametric EQ2. Now make sure that you do Maximus first. I'll show you why doing Maximus first is important in a second, but first let's get started. So I'm going to real quick solo my bass so you can hear just the bass. Real quick reset it to default settings. So what this does is this shows you a map of all the possible frequency bands that your DAW or whatever other program you're using is capable of producing. Now, what you use this for, or what I use it for, there's a lot of different stuff that Maximus can do. What I use it for is adjusting where the frequency bands are. So now instead of working with all possible highs and lows that my computer is capable of producing, I can shift that data set to my specific instrument. This will help me compress all my sounds into a few bands and eliminate the bands that other instruments are fighting for space with. So I'm going to go ahead, take down my highs to 0, take down my mids to 0, so I can listen to just my lows. Now you'll notice if I drag it up here, it has damn near the whole sound in it. It's not a really great way to equalize later. So I'm going to drag this until I get just the low ends. Now, how I tell where my lows want to end and my mids want to start is by the wobble. So if I pull it as low as possible, it's like a very low rumble, but you don't hear much of that wobble to it. There's not like a flanger type sound. But if I drag it this way, you can hear much more of that wobble to it. So I'm going to take it bass sound has most of its sound in the low ends. I'm going to have very little high ends and only a small amount of mids. So let's go ahead and turn that bass down, switch to mids. Okay, now let's check out the highs. So I'm going to do a high pass filter after this to cut out that kind of staticky sound. So now I'm just figuring out what part of the highs I want to keep in there. Now let's make sure my lows still sound good, or my mids. It's a little bit too... There we go. Alright, so now here's what it sounds like without making any of these bands higher or lower, just separating them out into their respective frequency bands. Here's what it sounds like without it. Now, you really don't hear much of a difference because I'm only listening to this, and all I did was sort it into a narrower set of frequency bands, so you won't hear much of a change. But if I put it with the whole track, you'll notice a difference. So that's without the Maximus. Here it is with it. Notice how much more it cuts through. Now this even allows me to turn the volume way down and still hear it because it's not fighting with other sounds in that range. With the same volume, if I take off the Maximus, it's barely audible. Put it back on. Now it's almost front and center stage. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you why it is good to do the Maximus first. So I'm going to open the parametric equalizer. For anyone who doesn't know, basically what this does is it shows you the different bands that you are working with and allows you to make them higher or lower. All I did before was kind of squeeze them together. So if I play it without the Maximus, you can see it's mostly in the lows. There's maybe a band right here and right here, but it's kind of fuzzy and I wouldn't know exactly where to place them. If I turn the Maximus on, look how much cleaner those lines are. Now I can see that there's a whole array right here that I probably want to get rid of. That's almost like a kick type sound, and it shows me that a lot of the resonance is right here, and that's where I want like the melody of my bass to come through. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of just put these in about the places I think I want them. And I'll tell you why I'm doing that in just a second. Okay, so now I'm going to use these bands, or these knobs, to highlight and bring out the sounds I want and take out the sounds that I don't want. And this is made much easier by the fact that I'm already looking only at where I want it to be. Okay, here's what it sounds like without the equalizer. That's what it sounds like with it. So now I'm going to turn both of these off at once and show you what it sounds like in the whole song, dry, and then I'm going to turn the FX on with this yellow button, and you guys will hear what it sounds like with this 1-2 punch turned on. And here's what it sounds like once it's been mixed. Alright, so that is the kind of basis of the technique, is just to use Maximus to isolate your different frequency bands so you can cut out everything else easier once you go to the parametric EQ. Now once you have done this with a couple different tracks, you can actually compare them. So like, let's say I wanted to add a different 808 in here that wasn't so deep and muddy. What what I'd do is I would open my second 808 and I'd be looking at the Fruity parametric. And I would want something that doesn't have bands in the exact same places as this. So maybe something where the low ends are kind of in the 50 range, and then the mids are maybe in like the upper hundreds instead of the lower hundreds, and then maybe even the highs in the 2 and 500s. So not only does this make each track you mix it with sound better and kind of cut through the noise and stop fighting with all your other sounds, but it'll also help you choose what sounds to put together when you're laying out the track. I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I like to just spend forever on the step sequencer, and I'll have all my sounds in a single pattern, and I won't know exactly how I want to lay it out. But if I use this little nifty trick to help pull apart and isolate the different frequency bands, then I can use this to figure out what different track layers would interfere with each other and fight, and which ones would go well together because they're not in the same frequency band. Alright guys, hopefully this will help up your production game, make your beats sound better when you're mixing them, and help you figure out how you want to lay them out and choose sounds when you are expanding on your tracks. If you like this video, go ahead and slide me a thumbs up so I can keep making more in the future. And if you think that this is something you might use, go ahead and slap me with one of them motherfucking subscribes, and I'll give you more tips in the future. Thanks for tuning in, y'all. Have a good one.